it goes back to me to like, what's natural, right? If it's not natural or organic for you, then people are going to know that and they're going to see that. And we are in the storytelling business. On the bottom line, we're in the storytelling business. And so your story has to be authentic for people to want to gravitate towards it enough to say, okay, I'm going to listen to this on a regular basis. And so what story is compelling to you?
Welcome to another episode of Listeners to Leads, where I'm helping podcasters launch and maintain a lead generating show. I'm your host, Alicia Galati, the CEO and head podcast strategist behind Galati Media, a full-service podcast management company. On this show, you'll hear my guests and I discuss everything it takes to launch a successful podcast and keep it running. If you're ready to get leads, land speaking gigs, and create deeper connections with your audience through your podcast, then this is the show for you. Today on the podcast, we have Roger Williams. You are going to love this person. Roger has two podcasts that he has launched. One he started kind of DIYing, just figuring it out after a big life change. And then going into a second one that is a very different podcast with some new strategies and ways that he's able to generate success with both, but using very different strategies. And then we talk about his third podcast, which will be coming out this summer. So stay tuned for that. I cannot wait for you to meet Roger. He's such an incredible person. What he's doing in the world is so needed. And you're going to want to, as soon as you're done with this episode, go back and listen to his podcasts. All right, join me in welcoming Roger to the show. Hello, Roger. Thank you so much for being on the show. If you could start by telling everyone who you are, what you do, and about let's go with your first podcast.
Okay. Thanks for having me, Alicia. This is definitely an honor to be here, and I enjoy listening to your show. So very much appreciate the opportunity to share with your guests. My name is Roger Williams. I am currently the host of the Crossing It Off podcast that is available 2 times a week now. At the beginning of the year, I switched to 2 episodes a week to drop. And the show is about people who have crossed things off their bucket list. And so each episode is different, and we have a different item that someone's crossed off. I don't duplicate. So my listeners have the best chance to hear that. I use the show primarily to sell a book and mentoring services that are both also based on bucket list mentality and the bucket list lifestyle. And so that's kind of what I've been doing over the past year and a half or so. And then 2 months ago, I started a second podcast with my partner, and we review seasons of television shows that we've binged together. So that's kind of where I'm at and what I'm doing.
That is so cool. So for anyone who's like, wait a minute, bucket list, like the movie, what are you talking about here? Tell us a little bit about what kind of led you to that, because I know you have a very interesting story.
So 2020 was supposed to be my 50th birthday year. Like I was going to have all these things that I was going to do for my 50th birthday and celebrate the entire year. Fortunately, my birthday's in January, so I was able to plan all these things out. And as we all know, January 2020 kind of sucked. and all those plans got derailed very heavily. And so like a lot of people, I was thinking about what my life is going on, where do I find my self-worth? And at the end of 2020, I had a heart attack. And so that put that conversation in high focus for me. And I decided that, like a lot of Americans, 95% of us would say we have a bucket list, but only about 40% have it written down and do anything about it. And so I wanted to change that. And really, it was about finding my self-worth, of saying a lot of times in life and in business, we meet new people and we say, what do you do? What do you do? Like, that's a natural question. And I always answer that question with who I worked for and what I did to sell my labor to them. And I didn't want my life to be focused on that. I was in the teaching field. It was very rewarding. And everyone always told me, oh, that should be so rewarding. But I wanted to be known for more than that. And I wanted to be able to tell people, this is who I am. I live out my bucket list. So a couple months after the heart attack, I went on to all my socials after, realizing this is where I want to take my life. And I changed my job title to the head crosser off of my bucket list. And from there, I just decided that that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to cross things off my bucket list. The number one thing was to go on the Camino de Santiago, walk 500 miles across northern Spain. And 2021, I was able to do that. I came home from that trip. It took me about a month, and I came home and went back to work. And my colleague at work said, "How was your trip?" I showed her this reel of all of the people. It was basically just a slideshow of all the people that I met along the way, set to music. And when she was done watching it, she said, "Wow, I've never seen you that happy before."
Mm.
And that hit two different ways, right? The first one was, "Oh, I'm so glad she could see that. I'm glad that that showed that in these pictures that I was happy," because I was. I don't know if there's been a time in my life of 51 years where I was that happy. I just really enjoyed my time on the Camino. But the next thing is like, I've known this person for 4.5 years and have worked with them, and they're my friend at work, and they've never seen me that happy. There's a problem. And so part of that for me was I needed to take a break, a career break, an adult gap year, whatever you want to call it, and really figure out what it was that I wanted to be, what made me happy, and what brought me joy. And so I started the podcast November of 2021 and said there had to be other people out there like me that were crossing things off their bucket list. And I just wanted to interview them. For me, part of podcasting and being successful at podcasting is that you enjoy it. And so when I went to a friend of mine who I did not listen to podcasts before I started one, and I went to a friend that I knew who was close to me, who knew me, and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing this thing where I interview people about their bucket list items. What do you think?" And he goes, "Oh, it's perfect." And I said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Because that's you. I've watched you meet new people for the first time and get them to tell you their story." And so it was a natural fit that I would sit there and be curious. I'm a curious person by nature, and I'm curious about this topic because I'm going through it myself.
Yeah.
Even after this interview that we do right now, I'm going to be doing an interview for my show where someone's crossed off visiting Morocco. And that is a primary thing on my bucket list right now. I'm thinking about doing it in the fall. And so for me, it's just a natural thing to want to be curious, and about this topic is very natural for me. So it made it very easy to do the show.
This idea of creating community, right, around something that I think is so needed in life, not just in podcasting or in media or anything like that. Like thinking about a few things. When my mom passed, she passed in her 40s, and she had a bucket list written that I found in her things. And like, just to see that, and she had written it like 6 months before she passed. And so like seeing that and being like, I kind of want to do some of those things and like honor her and like memory of her and like having that list, and like also the sadness of her life not being able to complete those things, and being a parent myself and knowing that your kids are not going to remember the things that the work you did. Most kids don't even know what you do for work. It's like they're going to remember the memories that you made and the things that you did with them, and those moments that are really special, which are like those bucket list moments, right? And so I love this idea of like getting to the point where it's like, we're not just here, right? Let's get existential a little bit. I've had enough coffee today to get a little existential. We're not just here on this earth to go to work and go home and burn out, because that's really what it comes down to, right? Like doing the things that make us happy, doing things that bring us joy, bring us excitement, and allow us to connect with other people like you're doing. I think what you're doing is so incredible. So when you went into that, I mean, you went into this podcast with no real idea of like podcast community and podcast industry and like what it looks like. But now you're at the point where you have launched a second one in a completely different field. And I love that so much. So tell me a little bit about the things that you did launching that first one and how it differs from launching the second one.
So the first one is like, I didn't know what I was doing. And it was just, I'm a firm believer in you just do things and you get better at time. And so that's what I did. And, a lot of us look back at that first episode and it's like, oh my gosh, it was so bad. And I'm horrible. The sound's horrible. The quality is bad, but it's doing reps, right? I look at it as like you go to the gym. You're not where you want to be that first day in the gym. And you have to do the reps repeatedly over and over and understand, like I've heard on your show before, is that it's a long game. And so I kind of went into it with that mindset of this is going to take time and it's not going to be overnight. I think I had a little bit of higher expectations for my current community to get engaged and be involved. I had at that point 3,000 followers on Instagram and I had my friends and family on Facebook. And I thought, oh, everyone's going to support me. And that is not the case. I think that was the biggest disappointment. I knew to get to 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 downloads, per episode, that's going to take time. I get that part of it, but I thought there would be more buy-in and support of what's for me. And so that was a little discouraging, but it's like, I'm not really doing this for them. And understanding that not everybody, especially if you niche down enough, not everybody in your circle and your community is going to go, all right, let's go. And that was difficult for me in the beginning. I just threw myself into, I'm going to do this. It was part of the bucket list mentality a little bit that I have to bring my own joy. I have to bring my own success. And so I'm going to do whatever I can to figure out how to do this. And it's very frustrating, honestly, in the very beginning. There's a lot of predatory practices, I feel like, in the podcast community or sector, paying for appearances on podcasts to promote your show, like everyone tells us to do, is very predatory. No. I did it once. Shame on me. I did it once and I learned, and then I moved on. And I think that was the biggest thing for me. Is just I have always been in this process, especially with this first show, of saying, okay, if something doesn't work or it's not right, or I learn something new, I figure out how to incorporate that in what I'm doing. And I'm not apologetic. It's not like I'm going to go back and fix all the other episodes that I've done. That would just be insane practice to do. But just understanding that I'm going to keep on going. And as the show grows, that there's new listeners, and those new listeners may not have listened to the very first episode. So you just keep going. And that's the way they come into knowing your show and listening to it first time. That's what they know of your show. They don't know of all the past episodes. They do go back and listen to other ones. And that is something that shocked me, is that, that you have to understand the idea of the long tail. When you first release an episode, you're going to have lots of numbers. But then over time, it still produces downloads. People are still listening to those things. Your total downloads per month include your first show. And so it was just a lot of self-taught learning and going out there and finding the information and being able to decipher what's for me and what's not for me. It's been a long haul, but I'm to the point now, especially with launching the second show, I was like, okay, I get it. I understand. I know what to do, what not to do. And really part of it for me, the difficulty is that I wanted to be 100% organic, meaning that I didn't want to synthesize my growth. I didn't want to go out there and what I would consider cheating for me. I wanted to do it right. So that forced me to go out there and find that information, find podcasts like yours to be able to enhance what I'm doing, because I don't have money to throw at this. And I know some people that have that, and that's great if you have the money to be able to go out and bring in help, like you offer to folks, but I just didn't have it. So I had to learn everything. I had to watch every YouTube video, read every blog, and go, okay, this is what I need to do. And it's been a long journey, but I enjoy it. I mean, again, it goes back to me is that I love the topic. I love the nicheness of what I do on the Crossing Off podcast. So that's what drives me. And if you don't have that, I've watched so many people start podcasts and they're like, oh, mine's about business, entertainment, blah, blah, blah. And they go down the list of like 5 different things. And I'm like, this is not going to work.
No.
I mean, this is one of the first things I heard was niche down. I'm like, oh, I'm already there. With the idea, I was like, I'm already there. But there's so many people that go out there and try to be everything to everybody, and you just can't. And you have to come to grips with that and know that, there's 8 billion people in the world, and eventually you're going to find those 100,000, 200,000, whatever it is, people that want that content.
Yes. Oh, that's so good. Your show with your partner is co-hosted. And I have had a co-hosted show before, and it is very different than even like having a show where you are the only host. Maybe you're having guests on, you're doing some solo episodes. How has that been for you? And even your relationship? Because I know that sometimes that can cause like, hey, I want to do it this way, and this person wants to do it this way. It can kind of sometimes cause some tension.
I guess I would start by saying that I'm very lucky, for sure.
Perfect.
But also, because she's an amazing person. But also with Call the Binge Wife, it was also very natural. So it was something that we already did. We already binge watch TV together. We go through a process of deciding together what that is, right? So that's part of the show, is us talking about, how did we get here? How did we get to Andor? Well, I'm a huge, massive Star Wars geeky person. She kind of likes Andor. So we go through that, some of the negotiations we have to do. Sometimes it's just, okay, go ahead and watch that. I'm going to play on my phone, and then I get engaged, or vice versa. And we talk about that process. So for us, and my pitch to her was to even do it was, we already do this. And again, it goes back to what it was with the Crossing Off podcast. It's like, I already do this. I'm already curious. When I meet people, I want to know about them and I want to hear their experiences. We already binge watch TV together on a regular basis. And we talk about what we binge watched. We share our feelings about it. Was it worth it? And what we liked, what we didn't like. All those things are just the podcast. And that's the pitch to her was, we already do this. Let's just make it content and put it out there. And also part of it was that I'm the heavy lifter, right? Yeah. We have a show sheet for each show that we binge watch. And it has a place for, she does do the synopsis part because she's a great writer. So she writes the synopsis of the show that we've watched and we're reviewing. But then I create the sheet. It's on a Google shared folder. She just has to go in and type it up. And then we have a spot for the 3 things that I'm positive about the show, 3 things she's positive about the show, and we each get a negative. So there's a form where she fills out her positives and negatives, and then her opinion on whether we should binge it or watch it. Somebody else should binge it or watch it, and why. So she goes through and fills out that form, and then we use that when we record, and we have it. And so I do some of the heavy lifting. I do all the editing. I do, the promotion work. So she just kind of shows up and does what we naturally do. And so it made it very simple for us to do that. If you have a co-host that's like in another state right. and you don't see every day, that might not work for you. But for us, it's working and well.
I love that so much. And the fact that you're able to kind of bring your expertise of like having already hosted a show, you've done it. It can come more naturally than maybe when you first started, and you're able to organize it in a way that's like, this is what podcast listeners like. You already know what they're interested in and how to format the show. You're not doing those hours of research together trying to figure out, is this going to be worth it? At that point, you're just like, forget it. Let's do something else, right? Like, let's binge watch that show. So I love that you're doing that. And even adding in, we had talked a little bit in the green room before about the way that you released the episodes. So going back to your first podcast, was it every week and then you moved up to 2 times a week?
Yes. So I actually started the show in July of 2021. Then I took my trip to Santiago. I came back, hadn't done anything with it. And then when I took my career break, as we like to say, I started back up in mid-November, and my mom had put on my bucket list for the show, I'm going to do 52 episodes. Consistency matters. I'm going to do 52 episodes for a year. And I did that. And then January of 2023, I decided to go to 2 episodes a week. And it was because the show was taking off. Content matters. Giving people more content is important, I think, for me, but it did doubles everything. Right. It doubles my editing time. It doubles my time that it takes me to find these folks to be on the show. And I feel like I've done a really good job of that, of really bringing a variety of bucket list items to people. And that takes time to be able to vet and find people. And, I scroll Instagram hashtags to try to say, hey, would you like to be on my podcast? And sometimes I just get crickets, but every once in a while I get a good hit, but I have to do all that stuff. So that was really big. So part of the reason that we release the way we do, and as you were talking about it, we release a whole season of episodes of Call the Binge Wife at one time. So every first Thursday of the month, we release as many episodes as there are Thursdays in that month. So really we're doing 1 a week, but this way we can record them when we want to. There's no time schedule for her necessarily to be like, okay, we have to do it today because it releases tomorrow. We can, over the course of a month, we can decide what we're going to watch. We can decide what we're going to record and release. And then, so we do that at somewhat of our leisure time, that it doesn't have to be so rigid as I do with Crossing It Off podcast. So it also helps us because we want to lean into that binge watching mentality, right? That if you're a binge watcher of TV and you listen to podcasts, this is a great way to binge a podcast because you don't have to wait 7 days, 4 or 5 episodes drop at one time, and you can just listen to all of them. And we've had some good responses from folks saying, yes, I love that because our episodes are less than a half an hour. So, it's 2.5 hours. I just put your show on in the car and I listen to it until all the episodes are done. So we're kind of leaning into that. And there's a little struggle for me who's obsesses over numbers, where it's like, I gotta remember that release day is going to be big, and then the rest of the month's going to kind of tail off. We do release a trailer a week or two before the next season, so that they're the next month, so that we can engage with folks. We create a Facebook group that's kind of popping off a little bit for people to come and talk about their shows and share their passions and all that kind of stuff. So we're trying to engage folks throughout the month that we're not releasing. And at the same time, we're kind of promoting, like, get ready because we're going to have a trailer for what next month's or next season's binges are going to be on the show. So it's a little different than most. I haven't seen anybody use that schedule before, but it works for us for a variety of reasons. I think, again, it leans back into the binging, and it also helps us be able to produce in a timely manner what's going on. One of the things that she said to me after I pitched the idea was, I don't want my binge watching to become work. And so that's why I take on a little bit extra the load to make it happen. But also, we don't have to actually be stringent on a time frame to get it done. We have a whole month that we can produce those episodes and then release them all at one time.
You put your heart and your soul into your show. And I want to help you reach all of those potential listeners out there. That's why I'm excited to announce my upcoming podcast marketing workshop. It's about giving you practical tools to grow your audience. You'll learn the secrets to getting your podcast discovered, attracting your dream listeners, and boosting those download numbers. This workshop will be hosted live with a replay available on April 30th. You can sign up by going to galatimedia.com/workshop. Let's grow our podcasts together. I love this strategy so much. Like, I mean, you guys can't see me. I'm nodding over here like crazy. But I love it so much because it leans into strengths. It leans into this whole premise of podcasting, which is binge listening. Like, your listeners are not going to twiddle their thumbs and wait for you to release the next episode. They're going to go find something else to listen to.
Yep.
They want to constantly be listening to something. So if you can format your show in such a way where it makes sense, which your show, it 100% makes sense to release all those episodes and one clip. And then the fact that you're finding more ways to engage them, the releasing the trailer for the new season a week, 2 weeks before, freaking genius, because then it creates that excitement of like, oh, I should watch that show. They're going to talk about it soon. And I'm thinking about like the romance novel podcasts that I listen to. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts because most of them hurt my head and I want to edit them in my head. And I'm like, oh, you could have taken that out, or, oh, this guest is like mouth smacking and I need to just like, but some of them are not bad. And there's one that I listen to where every season they're doing one category of romance novels, right? And so I'm not going to listen until they're done. And then I'm going to pick through, see which ones they reviewed, which books they reviewed, which authors that I'm like, ooh, I've been looking at that book, or I've been wanting to read that book, or, ooh, I really love this category. I'm just going to binge all of them. But I'm not looking at it every week because it's more of a entertainment style, right? Podcast. And so I think that you've really found a strategy that works. And I love that so much. I say constantly on the show, there are no rules to podcasting. Yes, there are strategies that work and there are things that you can implement and things that you can try, but no one way is going to work for everyone. And I love that you have found a way that works for you. So tell us a little bit about your future show that you're going to be launching this summer and kind of like how you're kind of thinking about it.
Yeah. So the title of the show is Bring It In, Bro. And it is a show focused on modern male masculinity and what that means. And I don't have a prescription of per se what that is. I'm currently in the process of writing my second book, which is called Wrestling with Pops. And it is a memoir about my father's relationship with his dad, my relationship with my dad, and my son's relationship with me, and the trauma, toxic masculinity, men's mental health, and generational trauma that I'm trying to break with my son. And so that got me thinking about some of those issues and wanting to explore those issues personally with the people, the men in my life. I'm a very lucky man that I have several very good male friendships and men that have been in my life for a long period of time. And so I want to explore those relationships in this new podcast. So it's kind of selfish. It's a selfish podcast at some level. For me, I have started recording episodes already. I heard one of your strategies is you got to get past 10 episodes. And so my goal is to have about 3 or 4 months in the bank before I launch the podcast and coincide the launching of it with the launching of the book is kind of where I'm pushing it. So I record like 1 or 2 every month or so. I already recorded several. The first one that I'm going to release is with my best friend of 38 years. We've been friends for a very, very long time. And the show is essentially about, or the conversation came down to, when did we first as men start telling each other that we love each other? Because we do. And we talk on the phone like, he lives in Arizona, I live in Washington, and we talk on the phone 3 or 4 times a week. And we tell each other we love each other all the time. So he comes from a military background. His father was in the military. He was in the military. We talk about that and their relationship. We talk about my dad and when my dad and I started first really saying, I love you. And then we go into, when did we start doing that? When did we have those conversations? And how did that impact our relationship? And so that's basically, not every episode's going to be like that. It's going to be different. I have a friend that I interviewed that we talk about toxic masculinity in the gaming community because I worked at a GameStop when he worked at, was a customer and doing very well. And it's those kind of issues, not necessarily coming from a specific political or social agenda, but just having real conversations and saying, this is how I'm dealing with, this is what I see in the world, and this is how I'm dealing with it. I would like to have some guests that are notable folks. So I'm kind of reaching out to some folks right now, definitely some women that are in that realm that are supporting men and trying to help men. I have some big time guests that I would like to land. So I'm just doing that. I've created an Instagram account for that show, and I'm slowly starting to remix my reactions to other people's reels. I'm putting quotes from the shows up and just kind of trying to get some buzz around the show and get a community put together before I actually launch. And I think that's one of the things with the Call the Binge Wife that we kind of did is I actually put out a trailer about a month before we started promoting that trailer, which I did not have any idea or understanding what that was when I did Crossing Off podcast. And I think that really helped people see, okay, this is coming. This is what it is. And so that was a good strategy. So I'm kind of extrapolating that out for Bring It In Bro as far as taking several months to kind of build up to that launch before we, start dropping episodes in.
That is such a fantastic strategy. And I love that conversation. I think there's so many different ways that people podcast, right? Most of the people that come on the show, they're like, oh, I'm a business owner. I'm using my podcast for business. But there are so many different ways that you can use your podcast to, like you said, explore things that you're interested in very selfishly. And that's okay. Like I had a podcast about cults with my sister where we talked about cults to process having grown up in a cult and what that looked like. And like getting in front of and getting to know other people who had gone through similar experiences until it stopped serving us. So like it just got to the point where it was like, this is a bummer. Cults are bummers. We're not going to talk about this anymore. And that's okay too. Like just kind of letting yourself externally process and verbally process things, I think is such a fantastic way to use podcasting beyond just, oh, I want to use it to make money and grow, my business, but like create real connections with people, make a difference in the world. And even thinking about your future podcast and the content you're going to be creating, your son being able to grow up and have that content, those conversations that you're having. And I think it's absolutely inspiring. So kudos to you. Everybody go listen.
Thanks. It goes back to me to like, what's natural, right? If it's not natural or organic for you, then people are going to know that and they're going to see that. And we are in the storytelling business. On the bottom line, we're in the storytelling business. And so your story has to be authentic for people to want to gravitate towards it enough to say, okay, I'm going to listen to this on a regular basis. And so what story is compelling to you? I can't believe I've seen in some of these Facebook groups lately, podcast community, where people are saying, what would be a good topic for a podcast? If you can't figure that out, if you don't know that on your own, like I'm not calling you a dummy, but like it has to come from you.
Yeah.
Because that's what this is about. I mean, even the big names, right? Even if you're looking at a Dak Shepard or an Oprah Winfrey, they're telling stories that matter to them. They're not just letting anybody on their show, right? Just to promote whatever they want to promote. They are telling a story that's important to them and valuable to them. And that was a struggle for me for a while with the Crossing It Off podcast. Because if you put yourself out there in any form or fashion as a podcast looking for guests, you get coaches, you get authors, you get, all these people. And it's like, I had to spend all this time, which is really frustrating, explaining this is the show. I am not changing the way the show works for you to sell your product. Right. This is the story I'm trying to tell. If you don't have this story, then it's okay for you not to be on my podcast. And that was really hard for me because I don't like rejecting people. I don't like telling people no. And that was really tough because I had to guard the storytelling that I was doing. And it's paid off. Every once in a while somebody sneaks through. I'm reaching my 100th episode and I only think one time did I interview somebody and be like, oh my gosh, at some point I've got to tell them I'm not dropping this. I'm not using this. This is totally not what we talked about. And I tried to save it in the interview and it just didn't happen. But only one time has that happened to me that I got duped a little bit. But it's important that you protect the story that you tell and make it consistent. You can't be all things to all people. You don't have to be. There's enough people out there that will find your story and be compelled by it and want to engage with it on a regular basis.
100%. This has been such an incredible conversation, Roger. Thank you so much. If you can tell everyone where they can find you, hang out with you, listen to your podcast, and we'll make sure that we have links for all of them in the show notes. When you drop yours, send me the link. We'll make sure that we update your show notes to include that as well.
Yeah. So if you're interested in the bucket list lifestyle, you can go to crossingitoffpodcast.com. You can find my book. You can find the podcast. You can find my mentoring services, all those kind of things there. And if you're interested in Call the Binge Wife, you can go to any of the services. It's available everywhere. If you're a binge watcher and you enjoy TV, please come and listen. And then we also have a Facebook group for that, which is facebook.com/groups/Call the Binge Wife, I think, but you'll have it in your show notes. So people can find it and you can engage with other people that love binging TV. And we also post, when we drop episodes and all that kind of stuff on there.
Perfect. Oh, thank you so much, Roger. This has been incredible.
Awesome. I appreciate the opportunity. It's definitely an honor to be here, and I love what you're doing for the podcast community.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Listeners to Leads. If you found something in this episode valuable, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend who you know would also get value from it. Want to send me a message? My favorite place to hang out is Instagram. You can find me at alicia.galati. Let me know what your favorite takeaway was from the episode. And don't forget, turning those listeners into leads is actually easy.